In the next few minutes, you'll learn how a street kid named Ismael saved President Traoré from assassination using nothing but a broken radio. I'll reveal the exact moment when high-ranking military officials transmitted their coup plans, not realizing a child was listening. We'll also cover the dramatic confrontation at a private airstrip, where Traoré personally led the operation to arrest the plotters and rescue Ismael after they tried to silence him. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the president created an entire intelligence unit inspired by a boy most people walk past without noticing. Like a ghost, Ismael moved through the bustling Ouagadougou marketplace. People who were shopping swept past him as he swung between booths, offering brightly colored clothes, spices, and electronics. The majority of the time, people would only pay him attention when they wanted him to leave their doorway or when he approached their goods too closely. Since his mother's undiagnosed sickness led to her death 6 years ago, he had already spent 6 years of his 13th year living on these streets. He made the market his home, lived among the sellers who were only grudgingly his neighbors, and lived off of trash. His exceptional skill with electronics, particularly radios, set Ismael apart from other youths living on the streets. While his peers begged for meals or did menial labor for money, Ismael scavenged for discarded electronics. He'd unearth them in dumpsters behind repair businesses or at the edge of the market. Without any instruction, his deft touch connected cables and replaced parts with an innate perfection. When adults in the repair industry had given up on a radio, the kid could figure out what was wrong. After discovering his first broken transistor radio when he was 7 years old, he started his formal education. He disassembled it piece by piece, placing each component on a piece of cardboard before selling it for scrap. Working by the light of street lamps, he studied the interconnections of each part night after night. A lot of finger burns from his improvised soldering tool heated over candle flames taught him the ropes. Even the most highly educated individuals could not decipher the radio frequencies and signals that he had mastered in a matter of months. The daily schedule of Ismael was controlled by survival. He got up before the sun came up, showered at a public fountain, and then double-checked the devices he had stashed in a drainage pipe close to where he slept. He spent his days fixing broken devices for vendors, scavenging for food, and collecting trash. He would go back to his spot in the market at night, a narrow alleyway between a garment stand and a wall, and sleep on pressed cardboard boxes covered in a plastic sheet he had discovered. Day after day, this life went on as before, with the sole exception of the devices that went through his hands. His most prized possession was a single damaged shortwave radio among his few belongings. The original owner, a former soldier, had dropped it and discarded it. In addition to fixing it, Ismael made significant modifications to it. By repurposing parts from previous broken radios, he increased its power and gave it access to frequencies it wasn't originally meant to receive. Without recognizing it, he had built a gadget that could intercept government and military communications that were supposed to be private. He frequently tuned into these channels for the sake of curiosity, failing to grasp the gravity of the content. Because he mended their devices for practically free, the vendors tolerated Ismael. They could fix the radios that played music and news during slow hours for as little as a meal or a few coins. When their phones' screens broke or batteries died, he fixed them. He gained a foothold in the market's ecology and was able to eat most days thanks to this arrangement. When the authorities were conducting sweeps to remove homeless children from popular tourist spots, several sellers even warned him. He was practically unnoticed due to his social status. While passing him, government officials spoke about sensitive issues. Without lowering their voices, police officers exchanged details regarding activities. As if he weren't present, customers spoke openly about graft, politics, and rumors. He had a deeper understanding of the country's reality than the average person ever could have imagined because to his invisibility. He learned an astonishing amount about the political climate in Burkina Faso just by listening to radio and talking to people. Ismael had surpassed even certain military technicians in his comprehension of radio communications. Despite having no academic schooling in the field, he had the ability to recognize various forms of transmission, differentiate between unencrypted and encrypted channels, and even pick up on patterns in the government frequencies that he had inadvertently uncovered. Nobody dared to ask a homeless kid about such complex issues, But if they had, they would have been astounded by his level of understanding. This oblivious young man, who lacked a family, a home, and an education, had unwittingly honed abilities that would ultimately rescue the leader of his country. The president's life was intertwined with the radio frequency he used to listen to as a pastime. A coup that may have caused widespread anarchy in the nation could have been averted if people had offered to replace broken electronics. The market began that morning like any other. A new day of survival awaited Ismael, so he got up, counted his meager dollars, and got ready. Being a street kid one moment and a national hero the next was completely out of his mind by the time the sun went down. The fate of Burkina Faso and his own life were both changed by that routine August Wednesday. He sat fiddling with his hacked radio when he started to get strange messages. Seated alone in his office in the presidential palace, President Ibrahim Traoré gazed at the stack of security reports resting on his desk. Even with the fortified perimeter and armed guards stationed outside, he felt no longer secure. The truth is that they ensnared him. After 3 months at the helm of Burkina Faso, he began to doubt his surroundings. His ministers reached a hasty consensus. The palace staff operated at a whisper, and his security detail kept a careful eye on him. Years of military service had given Traoré keen intuition, and now it was warning him of impending peril. More than anyone else, Traoré understood the precarious nature of authority. After the previous administration ignored mounting security concerns posed by extremist groups, he himself launched a military coup that toppled the government and put him in charge. It would have been equally easy to depose him using the same means that propelled him to power. Looking into the mirror first thing in the morning always made him wonder if someone else would determine they were a better leader than him today. He was most troubled by the alone. Each report was cleansed and sterilized before it reached him. His advisors vetted every information. Rather than letting him know the reality, were they shielding him from needless anxiety? Instead of hearing the carefully worded briefings about Burkina Faso, he needed to witness it for himself. Everything changed that morning when he made a decision. To get to the bottom of people's opinions, he would sneak about Ouagadougou's markets unaccompanied and disguised. His bodyguards' reactions were spot on. "Absolutely impossible," remarked his head of security. They said, "The risk is too great." In response to Traoré's insistence, they suggested a middle ground. 3 plainclothes officers would accompany him while keeping a safe distance. He consented, but he set his own conditions. Plain brown pants, a white blouse, and a cap pulled low over his eyes would be his everyday attire. He was just like any other shopper. No earpieces, no hidden weaponry, nothing to set him apart. Telling them, "I need to see with my own eyes," Traoré continued. His bodyguards gave in, but their disapproval was plain to see. "I need to feel what the poor feel, hear what they say when they don't know I'm listening." The following morning, President Traoré emerged from the palace compound by the service door, resembling any middle-class individual making their way to the market. After spending months in the cold palace, the sensory assault of the market was a welcome change. The air was thick with the aroma of roasting meat, spices, and perspiration, as vendors yelled out prices and motorbikes screamed through cramped alleys. As he made his way through the throng, he overheard people talking about how food costs were going up and how water was becoming scarce in the areas further out. Although these mundane problems were barely mentioned in his briefings, they seemed to consume the minds of everyone passing him on the street. After 1 hour of exploring the market, Traoré observed a handful of people huddled around what seemed like a news broadcast. He inched closer, anticipating the national radio station to break official news. His curiosity piqued. In its place, he beheld an odd sight. A youngster, no more than 12 years old, perched atop a weathered metal box. The young man spoke out into the street as if he were a news reporter, his rusty, battered radio dangling from a stick. It was breaking news, and the youngster shouted to anybody who would pay attention. Astonished by the boy's ferocity, Traoré inched closer. He was surrounded by a small group of curious adults who appeared more entertained than engaged, with the majority of the spectators being children. "Traitors are planning to kill President Traoré tonight." Those were the words that rendered the president speechless. As he pushed through the small gathering, Traoré lowered his cap. In his next remarks, the young man elaborated on a meeting that Traoré had attended yesterday at the Ministry of Defense. In the course of that evening's presidential council meeting, the youngster disclosed particular individuals, times, and places associated with the intended assassination. What gives a homeless kid this kind of knowledge? Only his closest advisors had access to the sensitive information. The president gave the boy a closer look. He spoke with unwavering conviction despite his scraggly appearance, which included ragged clothing and smart eyes. As if his warnings were more of a form of entertainment than news, the majority of spectators were doubtful. Some of them made fun of him, then walked away after throwing a few coins at his feet. The lad, however, showed no signs of giving up and went on to detail the plotter's strategy to conceal the murder during the council meeting. The more Traoré listened, the chills ran down his spine. The young man identified his defense minister and chief of internal security as the heads of the conspiracy. The individuals who were in charge of his safety were the same ones he met with every day and who had access to his schedule, meals, and personal quarters. They intended to accuse terrorist organizations of the killing, the youngster said, so they could proclaim a state of emergency and seize power. In his increasing terror, Traoré came to the realization that the youngster must have a way to access true secret messages. Such particulars could not have been concocted by anyone. His inner circle conspirators were obviously irresponsible. They probably didn't think a street child could overhear their discussions. For Traoré, donning his disguise had become more of a necessity than an exciting new adventure. With nowhere to hide, he stood in a packed market just hours before his own planned assassination. A man wearing a simple white shirt and brown pants approached Ismael as the small group surrounding him started to disperse. He appeared to be no different from any other market shopper, as he wore his cap low over his eyes. Acquiring a little bag of peanuts from a vendor nearby, he approached the youngster in a casual manner. Unaware that the man he had warned about was standing right next to him, Ismael persisted with his broadcast. The man murmured softly after a few minutes when the final spectators left. His voice remained steady as he questioned, "How do you know these things?" But his heart was racing. With an eerie expression on his face, Ismael prepared to bolt if the stranger threatened trouble. When adults take an unexpected interest in children living on the streets, the kids quickly learn to be wary. Ismael softly remarked, "My radio," as he holding up his bent gadget. He paused before boasting, "I built extra circuits to pick up more frequencies. Sometimes I hear things I'm not supposed to." The child continued, "I fixed it and now it catches all kinds of signals." In order to have a more private conversation, the stranger gently nodded and escorted them behind a vegetable stand. According to Ismael, his tampered radio had inadvertently caught up encrypted conversations between high-ranking military officers. The Minister of Defense and the Chief of Internal Security were allegedly arranging the president's assassination, and he had overheard them discussing the conspiracy in great detail. They think their conversations are secret, but they use old encryption techniques, Ismael remarked, shocking the disguised president with his expertise. The military changed their main frequencies last year, but still use the backup channels for private talks. My radio catches those. The cassette recorder, which was kept together with tape and wire, was extracted from a little bag that Ismael had tied around his waist. Says he recorded part of it. He said, "Listen." Despite some congestion and interference, President Traoré could make out his defense minister's voice stating, "He must be gone before morning." The president's stomach dropped as the small speaker played the evidence of treason. The recording proceeded to detail the agenda for the presidential council meeting that was to be held later that day. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, when security would change shifts, the conspirators intended to strike. Terrorist organizations who had been threatening the government for months would be blamed for the assassination. They had fewer than 6 hours to prepare for the meeting, as the recording was made last night according to the timestamp. Traoré was in a hopeless predicament. The very individuals that surrounded him every day were also plotting his demise, so he couldn't safely return to the castle. However, in order to prevent the coup, he had to reach out to loyal forces. Time was of the essence, so he made a pivotal choice. He took off his cap and showed the youngster his face. A simple, "I believe you," was all he said. Ismael's jaw dropped in disbelief as his eyes widened in realization. He was confronted by the masked and solitary president of Burkina Faso. "You're him," Ismael murmured beneath his breath. "You're really him." Yes, Traoré acknowledged with a nod. And I need your help. I can't use my phone. They might track it. Do you know a way to contact someone without being discovered? After giving it some thought, Ismael nodded with assurance. I know how to send messages on frequencies they don't monitor. And I know places in this market where nobody finds you unless you want to be found. Ismail noticed three men in civilian attire slowly making their way around the market as they started to plot their next move. Their scant motions and rigid stance betrayed their affiliation with the police or military. They're trying to find someone, Ismail muttered as he drew the president closer to a bale of fabric. The guys approached a seller at the market and presented him with an item, maybe a picture. The vendor indicated the spot where Ismail had been making his broadcasts. The conspirators dispatched men to locate the source after realizing their communications had been compromised. We must act quickly, Ismail declared. Taking hold of the president's arm, he drew him into a cramped corridor between restrooms. Using paths familiar only to children living on the streets, they spent the next hour making their way through the maze of the market. They squirmed beneath tables, squeezed through cracks in the market walls, and squeezed through drainage pipes that were just big enough for children but painfully cramped for adults. They went almost into the men who were looking for them twice, but then vanished into the maze again. Now the most powerful man in the country was being led by the once-ignored street child. Now that the tables were turned, the president blindly obeyed Ismail's orders and entrusted the youngster with his life. Confidently, Ismail traversed his realm, the crowded, forgotten areas of Ouagadougou, where the authorities never bothered to check. At last, they came to a modest outbuilding situated behind an electronics repair business. The proprietor, who was among the handful of grown-ups who had been polite to Ismail, was absent. With a key he had made from wire, Ismail extracted it and unlocked the door. An old ham radio that Ismail had fixed months ago stood amidst heaps of malfunctioning equipment inside. We can contact the military base directly with this, he added, swiftly turning dials and connecting wires. Which commander do you trust the most? As the conspirators tried to board their getaway jet, Traoré's faithful military leaders encircled the private airstrip. Ismail was rescued during the arrests, even though the plotters had abducted him after listening to his radio messages. His message had reached at the last possible moment. A new intelligence force called the People's Guard was formed by President Traoré in the weeks that followed. It was comprised of regular individuals. As a symbol of the group's leadership, Ismail gained a house and an education, while also serving as a reminder that underrepresented groups can have an impact on national security.